everybody, and welcome to the Underneath Podcast. Welcome to the Underneath Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Underneath Podcast with Kale Zelden. I'm your host, Kale Zelden, and I'm really excited to bring on a guest today, someone who works with students in schools like I do, but probably in a little bit of a different capacity. She goes by Gigi, and she's very active on Twitter, and that's where I originally met her. And so I'm going to bring Gigi on right now. Gigi, how you doing today?
Hey, thank you for having me, Kale. It's so nice to meet you and be here.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's great. It's great. So look, I'm eager to get you on and sort of talk about the kinds of things that I see and care about as a teacher and as a father. Mm-hmm. And you are very active on Twitter like myself. It's funny, our X Twitter. I can't. I'm not. I can't exactly. I'm going to continue to call it Twitter until somebody does something mean to me. Same. But I like Twitter. I don't know about you, but I really like Twitter. I feel like Twitter gets a lot of heat. You're like, oh, this hellscape and this, that. But I really like it. I've met a bunch of really great people. I've been exposed to, your work and your thinking. And so anyway, thank you for coming on and talking shop. So before we dive into the meat of our conversation, Gigi, I was wondering, I asked you to think about this beforehand, but like growing up, where are you? What are your Friday nights like? And what are your Sunday mornings like?
Okay. So I also just want to say, I love Twitter also. Yeah. When people say it's the worst experience and it's bad for their mental health, I'm like, okay, well, you're just doing it wrong because I love it. And I have made in real life friends there. Yeah. I feel like I have learned so much and almost grown as a person. So I'm with you. I just feel like if you're having a bad experience, you're doing it wrong. So, so Friday night and Sunday morning. Friday nights, I grew up in a really small town in North Georgia. Mm-hmm. It was teeny tiny. And so whatever you imagine small town Friday night, that was what we did. We drove around laps. we had to lap around the town. So, you'd meet in a parking lot, like the Piggly Wiggly parking lot or something like that. And then we'd all just drive around with the windows down. Of course, it never got super cold in the winter there. We had, a little bit of cold, but you could do it up until, you could really do it all year round. I was a varsity cheerleader. So during football season and basketball season, I was usually cheering at a game. Sunday mornings, I grew up low church Baptist. We were getting up, going to Sunday school and church all day, going to grandmother's house for lunch after church. And, just usually my mom would make her grocery store trip on Sunday afternoons and I'd go do that with her. And it was just very simple, really, really sweet life, wholesome. Like I had a very good childhood. I feel it was very enriching. I felt loved, supported, cherished. had a great experience.
Yeah, to jump in and sort of share some Southern, I'd say you were blessed, right? I mean, and really, truly, with that kind of anchored formation. Well, that's great. So how did you, a varsity cheerleader guy? One thing I do miss about the South, I miss Friday nights. I really do. And I grew up in a college town, so I miss Friday high school football on Friday nights. I miss college football on Saturday nights. That's a sacrifice living. Otherwise, I really like Rhode Island, but it's not quite the same thing as you know, I'm sure. So, so how did you get into the school business or the counseling business?
Well, I started. So I had children, raised my kids, but was always involved in their school situation.
Mm-hmm.
But being available to them was most important to me. So I didn't have a full-time career until they got to be early, like preteen.
Sure.
So I worked in their school in different capacities, either as a volunteer or a sub, something like that. I also did a lot of kind of informal consulting with families who wanted to move out of the public school and into private homeschooling, Montessori. They just wanted an alternative. They did not want to be in public school, and they never. I'm sorry. I'm probably going to have a cat appearance. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's good. It's good, Gigi.
Sorry. So I just enjoyed the education piece of becoming a whole person. I felt like education was part of becoming who you're supposed to be. And
did you learn that, or did you intuit that, or
it was more it was totally intuition, I think. Now there were certainly people who I hate saying I'm going to probably say it a million times. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
There were people who probably encouraged that I read. Charlotte Mason had a huge impact on me.
Yeah.
So definitely there was something feeding that, but it was mostly intuition for me. So I worked kind of as a consultant. I moved 13 families out of the public school into other things, homeschool, private school, that kind of thing.
And so why did they come to you? What was the basis for your kind of, presence or authority that they would come to you?
It's funny. I don't really know how that formed, except that I just would have conversations with parents, being so, I'm really sorry.
No, it's funny. I love it.
So I would have conversations with parents. I was just there all the time.
Yeah.
And when I would hear parents kind of complain about something, or I wish they did this differently, or I just feel like my child is, X fill in the blank, I would say, you don't have to be here. You can do something different. You don't have to do this. And so then it just became this, I've never thought about it that way. And I never wanted anyone to feel like they were captive to the American public school system.
Yeah.
And if you grew up in the public school system, if that's all you ever knew, then you thought you were beholden to that. You were kind of held captive. So once I started just sharing those things with people, then word kind of got around, hey, she's doing this and she has these ideas. And I would host brunches at my house, and people would come over and we would just talk, and I'd bring homeschool resources, because I was also a private tutor for a homeschool family.
Got it.
And so I had resources, I had background knowledge just that I had acquired, on my own. So that's kind of how that happened. So I had this piece that I loved, education. I just thought it was part of making you whole. But I also loved working with a demographic that tended to have, I'm just going to use the word ACEs. I don't know if you're familiar with what ACEs are. It's adverse childhood experiences.
Of course.
So children who have high ACEs scores, that just was a population that I gravitated toward. I don't know if it was because I kind of grew up in a poorer rural area, but I just had I was just drawn to those people.
Yeah.
So with that population comes a lot of problems. I mean, just, and trauma, drug use, incarceration, broken homes, all kinds of things. And so I kind of wanted to bridge this education piece with this population, because I did feel like this population was underserved in education.
Yeah.
So my heart is the heart of a therapist and a teacher. I really have both sides. And so I found myself gravitating toward a role that would let me do both. So I get to work in a Title I school, and I get to do therapy in a Title I school. So I get to advocate for education, policies, programs, etc., at the macro and micro level for my students, and I get to be part of a healing process. So it's just a perfect marriage of my interests and the areas that I feel I'm strong.
When you were a kid, were you the kind of kid who kids would come to talk to about stuff?
Yes. So I've always been the keeper of everybody's secrets, like my whole life. I'm like, I feel like I've always had this sign on me, like this invisible thing that's like, please come tell me all your problems.
Yeah.
And
I can relate.
Yeah. And so when you kind of give off that vibe, people find you. You don't know how people find you. They just always do. And I've been the keeper of many secrets, not in a bad way, not in a malicious, deceptive way, but just people who have burdens.
Well, it's called trust, Gigi. I mean, that's really, you became a person for whatever reason, temperament and upbringing and grace, to be a person of trust. So that's real. That's very real.
Yeah. So I found myself kind of in a perfect role that allowed me to use both of those interests, passions, strengths, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I wound up doing this.
All right. So now that my audience knows sort of where you came from and what it is you do, I want really to dive into, like, what do you see? You said at one point that you've sort of worked both in a kind of rural environment and you've also worked in kind of an urban environment. So I would consider you somebody who's had a pretty expansive experience, bank of sort of to draw from. And I mean, what do you see that, you and I both work in schools, right? So we work with kids all day long and in slightly different ways, and in certainly different clienteles, but still at the end of the day, we work with young kids. And, what about somebody who, goes to an office they drop the kids off at school and they go into an office from roughly 9 until roughly 4 or whatever it is. And they come home and what do we see? What do you see that you don't think most people pay attention to?
So I'm going to sound hyperbolic, but I'm really not actually being hyperbolic when I say this. I've used the term abuse factory for public education, and I would not say that it's that way across the board in every single public school. I mean, I do think the rural schools, the small rural schools are different than the bigger urban schools. I don't know how this sounds. This maybe doesn't sound PC, but poor people problems are poor people problems. And it doesn't matter if you're poor in rural America or you're poor in the city, in the inner city, your problems are very similar. And so there's just the culture of, I don't know if you've ever read Theodore Dalrymple's Life at the Bottom. So there's just this culture that comes with a class, and I grew up in it, so I don't, I feel at liberty to talk about it openly because that's the culture I grew up in. And there's just a pervasiveness of disregard for human dignity across the board. And in the schools that I'm in, I frequently see just abuse between students. So students abusing other students. Every manner of exploitation, just cruelty. So it's very common. And this is, I know we're going to talk about smartphones, and I want to bring that in now because the smartphones and the social media plays a huge part of that abuse factory function. So what will happen is if you have students, I mean, I just had this happen last week. So a student brings their phone to school. They're not supposed to have they can have their phone at school, but they're supposed to have it in their locker. Well, they never keep it in their locker. They keep it on them. So if you don't have a no phone policy at your school, your students will have their phones. Like you can say, put them in your locker. It's not going to happen.
Correct.
So she pulls her phone out during school. She has a bunch of messages from some girl who's planning to jump her on her walk home from school. Well, she's been jumped like 3 times in the last year. So she's terrified.
Of course, yeah.
And she can't function at school because she's now read these messages that she's going to get jumped by older girls when she's walking home from school. She comes in my office, she's screaming, she's, having a whole meltdown, which of course she is. And that kind of thing happens more often than it does not happen. It happens on a daily basis.
Right.
Where,
Yeah, and I would imagine, of course, it's never just localized to one kid. That then that becomes sort of pods of friends who are sort of part of this drama, right? That kind of is radiating out from that one smartphone exchange, right?
Mhm.
There's a way in which all these other people get drawn in. You've got the
Right.
lurkers who want to watch. You've
Mhm.
got this whole dynamic.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, officially, what's supposed to be going on?
Yeah. Yeah, and so the social media piece really it just makes this like tenfold what
Mhm.
it would be if you didn't have the it says my recording has stopped. Oh, recording error.
No,
Did you
you're
get the
fine.
message? Okay, okay.
I'm fine. Yeah, yeah, we're good.
Okay, okay, perfect. Sorry, everybody. So you have this, it just increases the the problem when you have, like you're saying, you have all these people who are now involved.
Yeah,
Um, so people find, and I've tweeted about this too, like there's an entertainment piece
yeah,
to the
yeah.
violence and that kind of thing. So it's just all this horrible perpetuating abuse situation, and parents get involved. I've had parents
Wait, they, like,
call.
get involved, like, in the actual drama, or
Yes,
what do you
yes. So
mean?
parents will text their child and say, "You need to go confront this person." I have had fights in the lunchroom
Oh,
between students because their parents are egging them on through their phones.
right.
You know, so stuff like that. And there's just, like I said, at the heart of it, it's a total disregard for humanity, for dignity. They don't. There's
Well,
just no concept of that whatsoever.
right, and in addition, I don't want to be the school marm here, but it's like, what about learning that day?
Oh, there's no
You've got
learning. There's no
right,
learning going on. Zero
right,
learning. Zero.
and that's really I want to kind of that is the real important thing, that in addition to all of these sort of negative lessons that they're learning, by bullying each other and using the social media platforms as weapons, essentially, right? And then their parents are kind of, not only are they modeling, they're participating in this bad behavior, but they're creating incredibly destructive pattern reinforcement, right, for their children. But the ostensible reason why we have someone show up at around 8 o'clock each morning, till around 3 o'clock each morning, is to learn. And I don't know. I mean, if you're talking about this is happening, every day,
Mhm.
not to the same kid. I know what you mean, but like every day, there's some portion of your school community who is doing zero amounts of learning that particular day because they're involved in all of these other things. I mean, I don't think people know this. Am
No,
I wrong about this?
no. And a lot of people, when if I ever remark about it or say something negative, it's not that I'm trying to just be this Debbie Downer, this
Yeah,
negative
yeah.
voice about it, but I have worked in schools for about 15 years, and
Hmm.
like I said, in different schools, districts, and settings, and
Hmm.
I have seen this trajectory that goes, it's downward trajectory. Everything has gotten significantly worse, and like you're saying, when you just have drama all day long, and you go to school and you're receiving threats, and it's just utter chaos. eh, there's no learning happening, and you can't you can't focus, and kids are coming to school that are already kind of in chaotic, traumatized
Right,
environments,
right, right,
and they don't
right.
come to school to they don't feel any peace at school.
Hmm.
They feel it just exacerbates whatever is happening at home. um so no, there's no learning going on. But another piece, and I've talked about this in other places too,
Hmm.
um because there's not been an emphasis on literacy
Okay.
from the get, because they're teaching a different way of reading now.
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
called the 3 queuing method. I can't remember
Yes,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
That's
And
exactly right. Yeah.
yes, and they're teaching that now. And I have middle school students, and I've talked about this before, and I don't care if I sound like a broken record.
No,
They cannot read, they cannot
right.
write, they cannot form sentences.
Yeah, and I want to support you on this one, you know, because I'm not sure, well, we can talk about the implications of this in just a minute, but this whatever's going on methodologically, right? And that is, of course, the educational system is really a down, is a top down model, right? All of the teachers get training that is sort of certified by certain kind of agreed upon philosophy. And so, all of the teachers, again, and I love teachers. I'm a teacher myself, but all the teachers are kind of doing what they've been trained to do. And so, they're sort of doing this method. And, there's a great podcast, series, Selling Story, that is worth
Sold a
it.
Story. Yes,
Sold a
great.
Story. So I'll put the link in the bottom here. I'm in the middle of it right now, actually,
Very good.
listening to it. But the bigger point, the point is that, our kids don't know how to read. Okay. If they lived in a world that did not focus around and circle around the reality of a smartphone, that would be one thing. Okay, so they sort of take the smartphone thing, element off of the table just for a minute. We'll bracket that off for a minute. What are the implications of a child that can't read? And I think most people, certainly, like if you think of the different demographics, I think most people understand, look, I give my kids to the school, and the school's responsibility is that they're going to make them basically competent in the sort of the basics, right? And so, yeah, like that's what I would expect. I would expect to send my kid to kindergarten and first grade, and that they would learn to, they would learn how to read. And yet, but some kids do just learn how to read on their own. But that's such a small percentage of the population, right? So maybe sort of put those on the side for a second. What does it mean if your mainstream, like your big middle section of students, does not know how to read? Now, does this mean that they can't read a sign? Does this mean they can't read, a headline? I think they can. I think they can do those kinds of things. But for me, and I'm a literature professor, I teach English, and stories, and how can these kids read, I don't know, what's a novel, like To Kill a Mockingbird? Much less an essay, or an article. So what do you see with your kids that you're working one-on-one that they do not have this skill that they kind of know they need to have, but they don't have it?
Yeah. So what I was gonna tie that into just the behavior issues. I mean, when you can't when you're sitting in a classroom for 7 hours a day and you can't interpret what's being presented to you, you can't decode it, you can't read it, you can't interpret it. I mean, of course you're going to get bored and frustrated. And then you're going to fail your tests, and you're going to start missing. I mean, you don't do your assignments because you have to do your assignments at home. And guess what? When you get home, nobody's there to help you, and you have to read, which you're not good at. And maybe you can kind of figure out what it's saying, but you can't interpret it. You can't read the directions and think, okay, this is what I need to do. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that is a real thing. So you might be able to read a word or read a sentence, but in terms of like digesting that and thinking, what is this sentence saying to me? What's it asking of me? And then being able to output that, there's just not that. It's not there.
I mean, that's basic stuff, Gigi. I'm like, that's like I don't. I'm sitting here thinking, just as a sort of what if I couldn't do this? I don't know what I would do all day long. I mean, it's such a part of what I am and what I do and how I negotiate and navigate my way throughout the world. I can't imagine having that shut to me.
Yeah, it's wild. And so my students who are the lowest, I incorporate literacy into our sessions because I feel like that is a piece of what's going on with them. I think, okay, you're bored, you act up because you're bored, but you're bored because you can't participate with the material and you're embarrassed that you can't. So it's very humiliating for students to be called on in class or to be asked to read something or to go to the board or participate in any way. And so they have these major defense mechanisms.
Totally.
And so rather than saying, help, I actually can't read this. They're embarrassed because they're 12 and 13 and 14 years old. I mean, nobody wants to admit that in front of their peers.
Right. It's precisely the time where you're trying to like build yourself out, project yourself out. Like what kind of person?
That's right.
Oh my gosh. I mean, and again, you're talking about what I would sort of roughly call an honor culture, and young teenage honor culture is a real thing. And if this thing is sort of not something in your toolbox, your reaction to that is going to, seems to me, directly explain lots of the acting out that we see, ironically, on social media.
That's right. That's right.
These viral videos.
That's right. Yeah. And so that's why I think like my profession, really, if you're going to be in the school, you really have to partner with the school, and you have to just keep saying, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I think the root problem is, or at least part of the root problem. And, I will have students sent to me for behavior issues. And one of the first things I do when I get a new student is kind of do a little informal literacy test.
Like a reading test.
Yes. I do that with them to kind of gauge where they are, because I think, okay, if we're struggling.
How predictive is it, Gigi?
Predictive of like their abilities?
Yeah. You right?
Oh, I'm always right. Yes. I'm always right. Yes.
Yeah.
And then I start talking to teachers, and if they're not in reading support, I usually recommend reading support. And then I get frustrated because it's like, well, how did you not know this child needs reading support? I'm just the little therapist over here, and so I get frustrated with the system, because I think you have totally failed this child. And I never want the kid to feel that they're at fault. Yeah. I'm like, listen, you, and I'll always say, you've done nothing wrong. This is not your fault. When there's that moment of like, she knows I can't read, that kind of thing, where there's that moment where we have to come to terms with reality. And go ahead.
I would just say, how many people do you think know that child can't read?
It's funny. Surely their teachers know they can't, but I think there's a lot of denial. And there's a denial because there's so much pressure just to pass the kid on, just to do whatever you have to, do whatever you can to make this child pass. It doesn't really matter if the child's mastered anything, if they're learning anything. It's just, we got to get them on to the next grade, and I'll maneuver stuff over here, or I'll accommodate them in these ways so that we can just pass them along. And I'm sending kids, to high school that I'm really worried about. I'm really worried. Right. Yeah.
Man, okay. Yeah. Do you ever, I'm even having this conversation, and I anticipated some of the stuff you're saying, so I'm not, but hearing it from you, and I know, I know where you're at with this. It's not like you're not cracking on anybody. You want these kids to succeed. You want the schools to succeed. So this is not coming from a place of burn it all down, but it feels so overwhelming to even just sort of comprehend the reality that you're seeing, because the reality that you're seeing, at least what I'm hearing you say, is it's really pretty grim.
Yeah, it is, and I hate that. And so I do. I hate it. I think for me, I do believe that solutions start, ground up. Like, I think you have to start small with solutions. And so it really takes somebody, and I'm not like toot my own horn or, whatever, but it really does take someone, and you probably know this too, to see the problem and to say, okay, this is what needs to happen if we're going to fix anything. Just to identify the problem, because like I said, so many people are in denial. And so whenever I think maybe I tweeted about this, but I had, somebody come in my office and she's like, why do you have vowels on your board? And I said, because none of my students can read and they do not know what a vowel is. And she's just like, well, I'm out of here on that note.
Yeah,
like,
because you can't, you
need to know this.
Yeah, right. Because you can't face that. Because to face that in what are these 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th graders? 6th to 8th graders. All right. This is like a 7th grader, let's say, use our test case. You've got a 7th grader who doesn't know what a vowel is.
Right.
Now, okay. How often does Kale Zelden, have to name a vowel, in the course of a day? But that's so not the point.
That's right.
It's like at some point I had to understand that, and I got that. And, I'm so far removed, of course, that, we're very literate people, the two of us. We read big and complicated books with big and complicated words and paragraphs and sentences and the whole thing. But it's interesting to me hearing you, but it actually, at some point, that whole edifice that I live out every day, when I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet, or, teaching the Odyssey, that all actually lives on top of me learning at what, first grade, kindergarten, what
6,
a
7 years
vowel
old.
is.
Yep, that's right.
And that's a wow, I don't know. That's an overwhelming thing. I never think about vowels. I don't. I teach high school English, but I don't think about vowels.
Yeah.
But for some reason, that kid, does not know what a vowel is. And so that's why you have those pictures on the wall.
Yes.
And a teacher comes to you and does not register why that's a problem. I'm struggling with this one. I'm really struggling with this one.
I am too. And I just feel like with public school, it's so bureaucratic. It is very much like the iron law of bureaucracy applied. You either have people who are there, and there are people in the system who are dedicated to the mission, which is to, what is it? Education is the great equalizer. I mean, who are there to bring kids up, to educate them, to make them whole. And there are people who are, basically there just to have a job and keep the organization running. They don't really care about the mission of the organization.
Yeah.
And so, the person who sat in my office, she is the classic, cares more about maintaining the organization and growing the organization rather than she is about the mission. And so what you have to do is you just have to have enough voices that are there saying, what is the mission? We have failed. The mission has failed. Like we're failing. I mean, for me, I think being honest about it, I also think reducing school sizes. I mean, I would like to completely upend these giant districts where you've got hundreds and thousands of kids, literally 2,000 kids at a school. That's absurd.
Yeah, that's a scale I cannot imagine.
Because you know what? There's not enough teachers to man that many kids. I mean, you're just so outnumbered.
Right. Right.
And everything just kind of gets out of control. So, I mean, completely.
Because then it becomes about control, right? It has to.
That's right.
Just to function, it has to be about controlling,
that's exactly right.
A mass of 2,000 plus kids. And, person to person, adult to child instruction is pretty far down the list when you're trying to maintain control, it seems to me.
No, for sure.
I'm reminded of, what is it? The Dunbar number, that there's a sort of a certain threshold around 200 people that you can kind of really be friends with or know. And, sort of anything beyond that, it dwindles in significance pretty quickly. And so we have these, now you'll have to know everybody in your school in total, sort of that friendship level.
Yeah.
But man, at 2,000 people, I would imagine I can't even imagine graduating with a group of people that I don't even know if I ran into them at the Stop and Shop. It's like,
no, that's right. Okay, and I have to tell you this, and this is, I feel like I'm just like gossiping at this point, but this is, I feel like this is important information. It's important information about schools, and it's important information about a culture. You would be shocked at the number of students who do not know the students' names in their class. They don't know their names. Wow. I will say, they'll talk about a student, this person, they threatened me, they bullied me, whatever. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to look up this person to see if I know this person, because maybe they're in my caseload. Maybe I can,
back.
And they'll say, I don't know what his name is.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're in class for single day.
That's so weird.
No
to me.
idea.
So I teach at a very ridiculously nice, privileged school, right? And you're going to laugh at me, but I've got 15 kids in my sections. This is exactly right.
That's
and so, and we sit around a table, and they bring their books to school, and most of them read. Really, most of them read. And, I know all my kids really, really well. And by the end of the first week, they know me backwards and forwards. And so, yeah, gosh, that's the scale thing is interesting to me. I guess I haven't really thought so much about that. Because my perspective as a teacher, like, all right, fine, like throw another 10 kids in there. Like, I'll have fun with them. I'll do my thing. But but our whole school only has 365 kids. It's it's not even the size of a class in one of these
Yeah.
big 2000
Yeah.
plus places. So yeah, and so much of I think so much of the learning that I engage in with my students is because I know them and they know me.
Mhm.
There's an intimacy there that is hard to talk about, because in certain respects my students know me better, than my cousins know me, my
Mhm.
my aunts and uncles know
Yeah.
me. Oh God, that's like, and I'm sitting there thinking I'm teaching Macbeth, but maybe Macbeth is only gettable because they know who I am or something
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
and I know who they are,
Mhm.
right? And I
Mhm.
know who they are.
Mhm.
Um, so okay, so you've got this major literacy cliff or something,
Mhm.
that's there now. So you said you've been engaged in this, at least 15 years.
Mhm.
What And you say it's getting worse. You can
Mhm.
sort of really see hands on this downward trajectory. I mean, where I've got two questions, because I would do want to ask you about smartphones and COVID in just a minute,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
what when does that trajectory bottom out? And what does it mean for
Um,
that trajectory to bottom out?
I feel like we're kind of at the bottom right now. I don't really know
Yeah.
how much worse it can get. I do. It's the environments that I've been in are so non-conducive to learning,
Mm-hmm.
to becoming a whole person, and that's something that I feel like with a lot of new people coming into teach at schools. I would say
Yeah.
anybody who's 35 and younger, and I would even say some people who are like in their 40 like me.
Yeah.
And I feel like they don't know what the purpose of education
Right.
is.
Well,
There
okay.
is just there's no philosophy of teaching anymore. There's
Okay.
none. None.
Okay. So if they can't provide it, which is fine, I get that.
Mhm.
You're an observer. God, you're so interesting because you're in this sort of liminal space. You're there, but you're not there.
Mhm.
You're like talking with a bunch of kids in a bunch of different places, and so it affords you a kind of perspective that
Mhm.
is not normal. But you also have this kind of sense of mission that I'm sure at some level, in a very real way, comes from your faith and all of that. If you had to tell them what their philosophy of education actually is, and you were not going to spare feelings, you were going to be, blunt, how would you characterize their de facto, unspoken philosophy?
The teachers that I work with,
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of this whole blob.
oh, I don't even know that I don't even know. It would just
Uh-huh.
be like, get them on to the next grade. I mean,
Right.
that's what's so interesting is
Yeah.
all the mottos. So the kids will wear T-shirts. There will be mottos up in the schools,
Okay.
and like at the elementary school, all roads lead to the
Okay.
middle school they're going to go to. In middle school, all roads lead to the high school they're going to go to. There's
But there's no there. Like,
right.
there's no real destination. This is
No,
this
it's just
is
a
mere
building. It's
pass
a
through.
building. It's a building. Okay. So
Yeah.
once you like, it blows my mind that it's just okay. We're going to go to this building, to this building, to this building. It's no, there's no concept of like, who am I becoming? And so no one that I work with, and I'm not disparaging the people I work.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear
many of
you.
them. I know that many of them love the kids, and they work really. And some of them are so great with the kids. I mean, they really are.
Mhm, mhm,
But if you ask them, "What is your teaching philosophy?"
mhm,
they wouldn't be able to tell you.
mhm.
They have no idea. It used to be that you had to write when you. I mean, it used to be you had to
Yeah.
have a a philosophy
Yeah.
of teaching before you even got a job.
Yeah.
You had to develop that. You had to defend it. That does not exist anymore. And so you just have people who are in there and who are focused, especially the new ones. They're very focused on equity and that kind of thing. And they don't really want one kid to excel. They need everybody to kind of be equal.
What a warped
Yeah, it's very
it's warped
strange.
because you can see it comes again, I'm talking from the kids these young teachers
Mhm.
perspectives. I'm not talking about their professors, because I think ideological capture at the university level is real, and I think that there are real true believers in these ED departments that are sort of implementing some kind of utopian vision. But I could see how easy it would be to be a young teacher who, look, you want to be a teacher, so you're already you're not doing the fast track to riches and fame track, right? You know that, right? And so part of you is already like, I want to sacrifice earning potential so that I can work with kids. Like, that's already a kind of, you're enacting you're engaging the heart or something like that, right? And then you're being told, well, yeah, I care about equity and inclusion and these sorts of things. And equity sounds good and inclusion sounds good. And even diversity, I totally get diversity, and you do you, and, and all those kinds of things, which, I can drive a philosophical stake through the heart of those things. But I can imagine as a 20-year-old going through these classes, like, look, I'm trying to be a just person. So that can be kind of activated. Meanwhile, there's no sense of actual, what is this factory? You sort of jokingly call it a factory, but what is this factory actually for? And, this is something that I hammer with my students all the time. We talk about the telos, like, what is your telos? What is your destiny? What is this thing that you what is your calling? Right. And these are sort of things that I can explicitly talk about. But so it's funny because I just ended the school year. We read this story in James Joyce's The Dead, and like, why would we end a school year on this kind of sad story? And so then we talk about the dead and what does that mean to sort of acknowledge your death? And once you kind of acknowledge the reality of death, then you can start to then construct, because where this thing goes, you have to construct backwards some way of meaning. With that marker at the end, understood. And so I would say that, like, it's a great line I tell the kids all the time. It's, a philosopher's, before philosophy became a kind of academic pursuit, a business pursuit, the philosopher's job was to engage in the art of living and dying. And to really kind of give other human beings a sense of what that could be.
Yeah.
And boy, it sounds like I am so far removed from the kind of factory that you're talking about.
That's right.
Because that answer has to, that has to be answered.
Yes.
What is it all for?
Yes.
I mean, so in your setting, what would you suggest it be for these teachers and therefore these students?
Well, I mean, anybody who knows me or reads anything I ever have written, which is just on Twitter. I have a Substack, but I never write anything. Obviously, wholeness, like becoming a whole person. What does it look like for you to be intellectually healthy? Or rich? What does it mean for you to be spiritually rich? What does it mean for you to be physically well? And I believe in all of those things, like those all have to be part of becoming a whole person. And obviously our aim is virtue. Our aim is the good. That's our telos. That's our end. And so, if I use any of these words with my students, I mean, when I say virtue to a student, they have no idea what that means. If I say, what is moral?
Yeah. Okay. So virtue and moral. Okay.
Yeah.
So these are just sounds?
They don't have a clue what those words mean. So if I said, what is something that's moral? Like if I said, what is a moral decision? They would look at me like I had four heads. I mean, I'll say, okay, let me put it in a sentence. Like, what's the moral of the story? Like sometimes I'll give different, like I'll give like, have you heard it in this way before? Kind of give them different ways to like think about the words so that they can formulate a definition, in their own minds of what it means. And so really when I'm working with students, like I said, the informal reading test, but I also do this kind of like moral test, like this morality test.
This is fascinating. So okay. So back
I'm
to
sorry,
you.
I'm like all over the
this is great. No, look, I'm a storyteller, right? I mean, that's what I do for a living. I teach stories. And for me, virtue and morality, there's no way to understand that absent a story, right? Absent a narrative. That's sort of a bedrock belief, I guess, that I hold. So, where do you learn moral and where did you learn virtue, Gigi?
Right.
Like,
are you asking me personally?
Yeah, I'm actually asking you. I mean, I don't have a memory of not understanding this because I don't have a memory that precedes story.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a culture, in a family, in a church. I mean, everything was ingrained from birth. Like I don't like you're saying, I don't remember a time that I didn't know what was good and bad and what was right and wrong. I have no recollection of not knowing those things. I would say certainly as you get older and the loss of innocence, registers, then you start to, you have these moral choices and these paths that you can choose, and there's consequences to making, immoral decisions. So a lot of the stuff that I have to do, and I mean, it's so weird for us to talk about this because it's been such a part of our lives. I mean, it's what we've always known, but there really are teenage children who've never considered what their purpose is, who've never considered like the right and the wrong. They don't even have the language to talk about those things. And so it really like I really do start with most students. I do the reading and we do like a little moral assessment, not where I'm trying to decide like if they know right from wrong, not like that, but just what language are they familiar with? And then we start with first principles, because a lot of them have been in situations where they've made really terrible decisions, even at a young age. And they're tempted to make these decisions. They're tempted to continue down that path. So then it becomes a lesson in like first principles. So it's like, okay, let's play this situation out. You're doing this, what is the most right thing for you to do in that moment, kind of thing. And breaking it down that way. But you want education to be part of that, but that's been completely removed from the public school.
So
there's no moral formation at all in public school.
None, right? None. And I'm tempted to say when I'm in a cranky mood, and I feel like you're putting me in a cranky mood, not because you're wonderful, no, not because you, but I got, I really care about this stuff, like I really do. So, part of my social imaginary as a kid, I read a decent amount when I was little, and then I went to this period of time, probably from around the age of 8 till around 12 or 13, where I didn't read so much. And then I started reading again, and then I became a voracious reader, and so I've really been reading seriously since I was around 13 years old. And it was fantasy novels and whatever. It was not, I wasn't reading, Dickens or anything like that, but fine. But I also watched a lot of movies. I remember, something like, like Return of the Jedi. Like I remember that was one of the first. I remember going to The Empire Strikes Back, but I remember it was the summer of 1983, and we went to go see Return of the Jedi. Like I was super excited, and the whole thing. And I remember watching this thing, and like Luke goes to see Vader, like instead, and he doesn't go to see Vader trying to he's not going to go kill him. He's going to go convert him. And I remember being like, I sense, he says I sense good in him, and I just remember thinking man, that's crazy, right? Because Darth Vader's a bad guy, but man, it's there's something really admirable about the fact that he doesn't want to go cut his head off. He wants to go convert him. And I didn't quite have that language in quite that way when I was 10 or 11 years old or whatever it was. But I remember being struck by he was making a difficult choice. And it was a better choice, even if I wanted him to go in there and cut Darth Vader's head off, right? I wanted the satisfaction of the big bad guy getting killed, and Luke is sort of playing a different game. Okay, so and you just use that as an example of the kind of movies that populated my imagination. It is what it is. It's pop culture. And I could rattle off 30 other movies that were part of my world growing up. What about these kids? I mean, certainly these kids watch stuff like what? Okay, right. They don't watch. Are you telling me that they don't watch movies even?
They watch the most profane horror stuff you could possibly imagine. They
Okay.
can't. They
We're
can't.
adults. We're adults. Tell me what they're watching.
Well, and there may be some listeners who watch this. I think it's terrible, but it's Five Nights at Freddy's. I hate all that stuff. It's this murdery teddy bear. I mean, it's animation or whatever, but
That's fine.
it's vulgar.
It's vulgar and profane.
It's profane.
We can agree with that. I think that's fair. Okay, so
or Pennywise. I mean, I had a 5-year-old a few years
Right.
ago who talked about Pennywise, and I'm like, why?
5-year-old.
5. And this child was he was so disturbed. My heart broke for him. I mean, he was just
the evil clown, Pennywise, the evil clown.
And he talked about Pennywise all the time. And
wow.
Because parents, me and a teacher friend of mine, we joke and say that the kids have been raised by SpongeBob, but worse now, they're raised by Pennywise. I mean, they're just unfettered access to the internet,
or reels.
Yes,
TikTok's the reels, which are for our audience who might not know this, these are like minute-long clips, essentially, right?
Yes. And I remember I had a kid a few years ago. I did a home visit, and he was 4, and he was just the cutest thing. He's like, "Don't forget to subscribe to my TikTok." And I was like, and he was 4, and he's holding up his little smartphone, and he's telling me to subscribe to his TikTok. And I was like, "Oh, buddy, I don't even have TikTok, Right. And it just, but parents giving smartphones unfettered access to platforms like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. I mean, the thing is like you search and kids, they don't know how to refine their searches.
Right.
So they might put in a word that seems innocent to them. They don't know that they're putting in, but the algorithm, will pull up something that's not.
That's right.
And then it just takes 1 click or 2 clicks, and then the algorithm thinks this is what you want to see, and it just feeds you.
Feed.
And it literally takes 1 or 2 clicks, 1 or 2 watching of those videos, and then that's all that comes up. And if parents are not checking in, their child could have spent 3 or 4 days looking at the most grotesque, profane, vulgar things imaginable, and that's what the algo is set up to cue. It's just real bad. I know that sounds so gloom and doom.
No. But look, here's the thing. One of the sort of the features, or one of the things that I try to do is I consider myself someone who notices things, right? And I'm trying, in part, I want to build out an audience of people who I think need to see the things that I notice, you notice, other people notice, because it's important to notice it. It's important, to kind of know this sort of thing. And so, you don't strike me as a negative person at all, but you're also being very honest about the things that you're noticing, the things that you're seeing. And, just like that story early on, you tell a teacher who comes in, and she says, "Oh, like, why do you have vowels on the wall?" It's like, well, I've noticed that my kids don't know how to determine the difference between a consonant and a vowel. They don't even know what that concept, that thing even means, much less, choosing A or B, funny that's a vowel and consonant, but, So it's not like, oh, I'm going to go out and look for like all the awful things. It's like, no, awful things bubble up to the viewfinder, and like we have to say, look, that's a real thing, So so are we post story even with these kids?
I don't think we're post story.
Okay.
Because when I bring in story a lot, especially like my younger students who will tolerate like Little House on the Prairie, Little House in the Big Woods, Farmer Boy, that kind of thing, Narnia. Like I have students who love that, especially the younger kids. They love it if I read to them, or we take turns reading, and that's a great, it's great. It's reading aloud, taking turns reading, even if they struggle a little bit. It's great. It's great exercise, and we're reading literature that is good and wholesome, and they're reading about Charles Ingalls, and they're learning about their experience crossing the frozen lake, and then they get to the other side, and in the night they hear it popping and cracking, and Laura's just so happy that they made it across, and we read Ramona, and the young girls love Ramona, and they will get up while I'm reading, and they will act out Ramona. They want to be Ramona, and so I don't think we're post story, because anytime I bring it in, even up to 8th grade,
Yeah.
I brought in Les Mis to one
Yeah.
of my 8th graders who
Of
was
course.
just really, really struggling and just kind of dissociated from reality. I mean, I
Yeah.
was just like, how can I bring this child into reality?
Yeah.
We were just really struggling. And he got super into Les Mis.
Wow.
And I didn't read, but we watched clips,
Yeah.
and I would give him like context, and
Uh-huh.
it was we had great sessions as we talked about this and brought Jean Valjean's story into, so I don't think we're post story, because anytime I bring it in, the kids are like super engaged with story.
It's like light up time. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And look, that has to be right. If we contend that stories are true,
Mhm.
right? If we contend that, our humanity, true stories resonate with our humanity, that even a kid who's been sort of left to their own devices, even a child who's been neglected and has not been told these stories, there's something compelling about a well-told story in that moment that can pierce through all these sort of layers of protection and scar tissue,
That's right.
metaphorically speaking.
Yes.
So
I was going to say too, like one of the things that a lot of students struggle with is courage, because they are pressured to do the wrong thing a lot. It's really hard for them to be brave and to do the right thing when all their friends are wanting them to do the wrong thing. And I was just going to say, the Bilbo in the cave before he goes into greet the dragon. That has been a passage I have used multiple times to talk about
beautiful.
courage. Yeah,
It's
it's a great passage. And also from Alice in Wonderland, where she asks the Cheshire Cat, which way should I go? And he's like, well, it depends on where you want to end up. And she's like, well, I don't know. And he goes, well, does it really matter then which path you take?
Yeah.
So just like helping them to like start thinking about, okay, my choices, things that I'm presented with, there's a consequence to them. It can lead me to life or death. It can lead me to suffering or healing. Just getting them to the point where they can think about those things is, sorry, I didn't know my battery was dying, is like really key in developing them in therapy.
So in the world that your kids have grown up in, what have they learned?
My students?
Your students are not your children.
Okay. My students, what have they learned? They've learned literally survival of the fittest.
Okay.
I mean, that is the core. It's just survive. And they exist in survival mode, in fight or flight or freeze.
So we're all in the game, in the hungry game.
It is very much. We're in the arena together, and not in the arena like the fun arena where Theodore Roosevelt has the whole arena. Not the arena where you're like being tested and you're, this is like the Colosseum, like you're about to be devoured by
that was the image that was flooding my head. It's like you're in the Colosseum and there's bedlam and you've got a stick and somebody's got a net, and and you're just trying to you need to be faster. It's like, what is that old saying, that if a bear starts chasing you and your friends in the woods, you need to be faster than one person.
right.
But imagine, right? I mean, but imagine if but for real, right? That your life is sort of trying to be faster than just one person. Well, so no wonder, right? No wonder that that this is what we learn. And how do you even begin to open that up? Well, it sounds to me, what you have found is that paying attention to a kid, there you are, with them, and you're reading that section out loud from The Hobbit, or that section in Alice in Wonderland. Like that is a sort of a potential cracking open, for it.
Yeah. And the thing is like in the work I do, it really is like you're just, that you only have these students for a short period of time, per week and per school year.
Yeah.
And you have to come to terms with, I am not going to see, I mean, I can, every student I had this year, I feel like we've made progress. Like I feel like I could document progress on everything, which I'm thankful for. Yeah. But you have to come to terms with, what can I do with this student and the time that I have with them? How can I maximize our time together? And like in my role it's critical to like know what the point of your time is together. And I feel like that's just across, like with teachers, like you have to know what your point is. Like, you know, what is your goal of being together? And so, I don't know, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
no, I like that, you know, because I think about this, you know, and it's like, you know, people will ask me like, well, you know, your kid's really reading this or the, you know, what, and I keep going back to this idea that, you know, all of us need one memory. You know, I mean, hopefully we have more than one, but all of us need one memory, one thing that in a crisis pops into our head, right? That inspires us for courage, right? Or shows us that, you know, there's meaning in our suffering, or shows us that even though I don't want to make myself vulnerable, like I can make a connection with another human being. You know, it's those small little things that you know, whatever, it's a lifeline, you know, it's an opportunity, you know, because you know, I'll be honest with you, Gigi, like this whole topic, and this is not just you, this is like when I'm alone with myself and I think about this at a large scale, you know, I think about, you know, the nation, and I think about, you know, all of it, I get a little bit overwhelmed, you know, because I know I know that there's so much neglect. And what's so weird, of course, is that we live in a country of such superabundance. And I'm not making any kind of argument about, you know, I'm not making a political argument here, but it's like, you know, it just seems like we're so bad at this, you know, collectively.
Yes.
You know, we're bad at this endeavor, and, you know, and they need adults in their lives who are going to kind of care, you know.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that was a piece that I wanted just to mention, because I don't want to like end this with like, it's so awful and the world is coming to an end and we're gonna have a bunch of illiterate people out in the world, which we kind of are. But I think there is something that we can do. I think there is hope. I think that there are things that could be done and steps we could take that would begin to reverse all of this, in my opinion. And it's going to take, though, you know, people convincing others you don't have to be taken captive by the American school system.
Right.
Like they have to know it. And then also, I would love, I think you can salvage the American public school system if, like I said, you break up all these big districts. You have small community schools that have small numbers, where you have very small student teacher ratios, and they become community schools that are
Yeah, you know, there's just the natural check of a group of adults, parents, people who care, right? You know, just having some kind of access versus this now kind of nameless, faceless blob of a bureaucracy. I mean, how can you fight the blob? Well, you can't really fight the blob, but at a local level, you know, there's sort of a principle of subsidiarity here, you know, that on that local level, that if it's close, you know, you can make some kind of change and difference. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. I think that's right.
I really want people to start advocating at the policy level, at the macro level. Like, I want to see people starting to advocate for breaking up these big districts, making more community schools. And, you know, there are just so many things like that that could be done that I think would start to improve things immediately. And, you know, this is something I've talked with my district about, that I really want to, that I wish people would do more, is there's a lot of bad parenting out there. Like there just is. And for lots of reasons. And I'm not mad at parents, nothing like that, but it would benefit parents to have to, if their child is going to be at the school, like mandatory quarterly parent seminars, where you have people coming in just to talk about parenting stuff, things that maybe they didn't learn about, how to relate to their child, how to speak to their child, things they should be working on at home, you know, what parenting looked like in this situation, whatever. There's just none of that.
Yeah. And that's one of my larger concerns about it, you know, that taps into a larger concern I have about family, you know, and the role of a family, and what has been all of this wisdom that is kind of, it was for generations embodied wisdom, like wisdom that was passed on from father to son to grandson, mother to daughter to granddaughter, right? And that this succession, there's clearly been some sort of disruption of that. I mean, we don't even know how to be married anymore. We don't know, and look, the pressures are real. I'm not, I get all the stuff, right? But we seem to be dysfunctional at that kind of that base level, and that these are the sort of these things ramify out from, kind of interpersonal competency. I hate to use euphemisms, but it's like that's kind of what we're talking about. No, I know, but I think we learn how to be fathers by our fathers, and those, I was blessed with a great mom and dad, and you were talking about that earlier, like truly. And I know that part of the reason why I know how to say no, part of the reason why I know how to be properly angry with my child and then hug them, like part of the reason why I know these kind of the nuances of being an adult is because I was modeled in a real, they're not perfect. Like I've had to learn how to undo something, like, all that, but there was that sense that like my dad knew that his job as my dad it mattered, nobody else is going to do it.
That's right.
And so, no, and so it's so interesting to me, and this is a whole other conversation maybe for another time, but that the interplay between a school and a cluster of families, that's an I think people think, oh, I'll just send my kid to the school and the school will take care of X, Y, and Z. I think both of us know that that's just not how it works.
No. And I that's why I think like if you had smaller schools that were community based, where part of mandatory sending your kid to school is you come to these quarterly parenting seminars and you are required to be involved to some degree. I just think I think behaviors would improve. I think academic, and I think parents would start to say, oh, my kid can't read. My kid can't do math. They would realize, but they've outsourced everything to the school, and the school is glad to do that.
I was just gonna say, you and I have worked at schools for a long time. We both know that schools are all too happy to make sure mom and dad don't bother us during the day.
Yeah, it's true.
Right? So that's part of the dynamic.
I mean, I want to hear parents, but I know teachers are like, I don't want her calling and being mad. I mean, I've sat in meetings where parents were livid. And they ended up pulling their kids from school, which honestly, I was like, good for you. Like, I think you made the best decision. Like, I'm glad you did it, kind of thing. The parents who are mad have every right to be mad. Yeah. Honestly, I hate
No, I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
All right, well, look, Gigi, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go over time.
Not at all. No. It's fine. Whatever. It's podcast. It can be. We're not going to work into commercial breaks just yet. I'm a pretty small timer here. But I want, if we had time, you put a tweet out the other day. You said something about like monasteries or prisons. And I really wanted to pick your brain on that.
Yeah.
I think there's something to what you're talking about.
Yes.
That'll have to be for another time.
I'm for it, by the way. I'm for the monasteries.
No, I get it. Yeah, I got that too. Well, I live and work, next to a monastery. So I get that. So look, audience, you can check out Gigi's stuff at Twitter. It's at Going Godward. I'll put the stuff down in the show description. And that's really where she's got a big audience, and she's like me. She likes to tweet and send things out there and see what happens and see what sticks. And I appreciate, you don't just talk about school stuff, or you talk about God stuff. Obviously your Twitter handle would suggest that, which I really appreciate too. So anyway, check out her stuff. I think you'll really appreciate it. And Gigi, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kale.
All right. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.